In the small town of Ellisville, Mississippi, a tragic series of events unfolded that would forever alter the fabric of the community. At the center of this turmoil was Sheriff Harold Grayson, a figure once revered for his dedication to public service. The murder case that emerged not only shocked the residents, but also revealed deep-seated issues of trust and loyalty within the community. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the layers of betrayal ran deeper than anyone could have imagined, leading to a web of obsession that ensnared both the victims and the investigators. The impact of this case rippled through Ellisville, leaving a trail of heartache and confusion in its wake. The story is not just about a crime, it's about the emotional turmoil that ensues when a trusted leader falls from grace and the community grapples with the reality of betrayal from within. As we delve into the details, prepare for shocking twists that will keep you on the edge of your seat, revealing the complexities of human relationships and the dark corners of the human psyche. This is a tale of obsession, where the lines between right and wrong blur, and the consequences of betrayal lead to devastating outcomes. Join us as we explore the depths of this harrowing story, uncovering the emotional layers that make it not just a murder case, but a profound reflection on trust, loyalty, and the fragility of community bonds. Sheriff Harold Grayson was a pillar of the Ellisville community, known for his unwavering dedication to law enforcement and his commitment to the safety and well-being of its residents. From the moment he took office, Harold embodied the qualities of a true leader: integrity, compassion, and a relentless pursuit of justice. He spent countless hours patrolling the streets, engaging with citizens, and ensuring that the law was upheld fairly and justly. His approachable demeanor made him a beloved figure, and many residents felt comfortable turning to him for guidance and support. Harold's reputation as a fair and just sheriff was well-earned, as he often went above and beyond to resolve conflicts and foster a sense of security within the town. He believed that law enforcement was not just about enforcing rules, but about building relationships and trust within the community. At home, Harold found solace in his marriage to Clara, a partnership that he believed provided the stability and support he needed to navigate the challenges of his demanding job. Clara was not only his wife, but also his confidant and best friend. Together, they shared a life filled with laughter, love, and mutual respect. Their home was a sanctuary, a place where they could escape the pressures of the outside world. Harold often spoke of the strength he drew from Clara, crediting her with helping him maintain his focus and dedication to his work. They were seen as a model couple in Ellisville, often participating in community events and supporting local initiatives together. Their bond seemed unbreakable, a testament to the love and commitment they shared. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, there were underlying tensions that would eventually contribute to the tragic events that unfolded. The pressures of Harold's job began to take a toll on his marriage, as the demands of law enforcement often left him emotionally drained. Clara, while supportive, sometimes felt the weight of his responsibilities and the long hours he spent away from home. As the community faced increasing challenges, including rising crime rates and social unrest, Harold found himself consumed by his role as sheriff. The stress began to seep into their relationship, creating moments of tension that neither of them fully understood. As Harold became more engrossed in his work, Clara began to feel a growing distance between them. She longed for the days when they would spend quiet evenings together, sharing their thoughts and dreams. Instead, she found herself alone, more often than not, waiting for Harold to return home after another long day of dealing with the complexities of law enforcement. The emotional disconnect began to manifest in subtle ways, with misunderstandings and unspoken frustrations simmering just beneath the surface. Harold, too, felt the strain, but was determined to maintain the facade of a perfect life, believing that he could manage both his responsibilities as sheriff and his role as a husband without issue. As the pressures mounted, Harold's dedication to his job began to overshadow his personal life. He became increasingly obsessed with solving the challenges facing Ellisville, often losing sight of the importance of nurturing his relationship with Clara. The community's expectations weighed heavily on him, and he felt a profound sense of responsibility to protect and serve. This obsession, while rooted in a genuine desire to do good, began to cloud his judgment and affect his interactions with those closest to him. Clara's attempts to reach out and reconnect were met with Harold's preoccupation, leading to feelings of isolation and frustration on her part. The combination of Harold's relentless pursuit of justice and the growing rift in his marriage created a perfect storm of tension. Clara, feeling neglected and unappreciated, began to question the stability of their relationship. She wondered if the man she married was still the same person, or if the pressures of his job had changed him in ways she could not comprehend. Harold, on the other hand, was unaware of the depth of Clara's feelings, believing that his dedication to his work was a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the community. This disconnect between them set the stage for the tragic events that would soon unfold. As the pressures of their lives began to intertwine in ways neither could have anticipated. As the investigation into the murder case began to unravel, it became clear that the tensions in Harold's life were not isolated incidents, but rather a culmination of unresolved issues that had been brewing beneath the surface. The community that once looked up to him as a beacon of hope and stability would soon find itself grappling with the reality of betrayal and obsession, as the very man they trusted to protect them became embroiled in a scandal that would shake the town to its core. The tragic events surrounding Sheriff Harold Grayson would not only change his life, but also alter the lives of everyone in Ellisville, leaving a lasting impact that would be felt for generations to come. Clara Grayson, once the epitome of a devoted wife, found herself entangled in a web of emotional turmoil that would ultimately lead to her infidelity. The motivations behind her affair with Trey Garrison were complex and multifaceted, rooted in a combination of loneliness, unmet emotional needs, and a desire for validation. As Harold became increasingly consumed by his role as sheriff, Clara felt increasingly isolated, longing for the connection and intimacy that had once defined their marriage. The long hours Harold spent away from home, coupled with the emotional distance that had developed between them, left Clara feeling neglected and unappreciated. In her search for solace, she found herself drawn to Trey, a charismatic and attentive man who seemed to offer the companionship and understanding she craved. Trey Garrison was a local businessman, known for his charm and easygoing nature. He had lived in Ellisville for years and was well liked by the community. When Clara first met Trey at a local charity event, she was struck by his ability to listen and engage with her in a way that Harold had not done in a long time. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, and Clara felt a spark of excitement that had been missing from her life. As they began to spend more time together, the emotional connection between them deepened, and Clara found herself drawn into a relationship that provided the validation she had been seeking. In Trey, she saw a man who appreciated her, who made her feel special and desired, and who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. However, the affair was not merely a quest for emotional fulfillment. It was also a response to the growing dissatisfaction Clara felt in her marriage. She had tried to communicate her feelings to Harold, but his preoccupation with his duties as sheriff often left her feeling unheard and invisible. The more she reached out, the more he seemed to retreat into his work, leaving Clara feeling increasingly desperate for connection. In her mind, the affair with Trey was a way to reclaim a sense of agency in her life, a means of asserting her own needs and desires in a situation where she felt powerless. Yet, as the relationship progressed, Clara found herself grappling with guilt and shame, torn between her feelings for Trey and her commitment to Harold. The impact of Clara's actions on Harold was profound and devastating. As the sheriff dedicated himself to his work, he remained blissfully unaware of the emotional turmoil brewing within his marriage. When the truth of Clara's infidelity eventually came to light, it shattered Harold's world. The betrayal cut deep, leaving him feeling not only heartbroken, but also humiliated. The man who had once been a symbol of strength and stability found himself grappling with feelings of inadequacy and failure. He had devoted his life to serving the community, yet he felt powerless to save his own marriage. The emotional fallout from Clara's affair reverberated throughout their family dynamics, creating a rift that would be difficult to mend. As the reality of the situation set in, Harold's trust in Clara was irrevocably damaged. The love and respect he had once held for her were replaced by feelings of anger and betrayal. He struggled to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the person who had engaged in such deceitful behavior. The emotional distance that had developed between them was now compounded by a chasm of mistrust, making it nearly impossible for them to communicate openly. Harold's pain manifested in various ways, from bouts of anger to moments of deep sadness, as he grappled with the loss of the life he had envisioned with Clara. The family dynamics shifted dramatically as well. Their children, who had once viewed their parents as a united front, now found themselves caught in the crossfire of their parents' turmoil. The tension in the household was palpable, with arguments and cold silences replacing the warmth and laughter that had once filled their home. Clara's infidelity not only affected her relationship with Harold, but also created a rift between her and her children. They sensed the tension and unease, leading to feelings of confusion and distress. The once happy family unit was now fractured, struggling to navigate the emotional fallout of Clara's choices. Secrecy and deception characterized Clara's relationship with Trey, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. Initially, Clara believed she could compartmentalize her affair, keeping it separate from her life with Harold. She engaged in a series of lies and half-truths, crafting elaborate stories to explain her absences and late nights. The thrill of the affair was intoxicating, but it was also laced with fear and anxiety. Clara constantly worried about being discovered, and the weight of her deception began to take a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. The secrecy created a sense of isolation, as she felt she could not confide in anyone about the turmoil she was experiencing. As the affair progressed, Clara found herself increasingly entangled in a cycle of guilt and shame. She loved Harold and wanted to be the wife he deserved, yet she felt trapped in a situation that seemed to spiral out of control. The emotional highs of her relationship with Trey were often followed by crushing lows, as Clara grappled with the reality of her choices. She knew that her actions were hurting Harold, yet the allure of the connection she shared with Trey was difficult to resist. The secrecy of the affair became a double-edged sword, providing her with a sense of excitement while simultaneously deepening her feelings of guilt. Ultimately, the emotional turmoil caused by Clara's infidelity would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The once stable foundation of her marriage to Harold was now built on a bed of lies, and the trust that had been the cornerstone of their relationship was shattered. As the truth began to unravel, the impact of her choices would reverberate throughout the community of Ellisville, leaving a trail of heartache and confusion in its wake. The themes of betrayal and obsession that had emerged in Clara's life would soon come to define not only her relationship with Harold, but also the lives of those around them, as the tragic events unfolded in ways no one could have anticipated. The pivotal family reunion that would ultimately set the stage for the confrontation between Clara, Harold, and Trey was a highly anticipated event in Ellisville. It was a warm summer afternoon, and the sun cast a golden hue over the backyard of the Grayson family home, where relatives had gathered to celebrate a milestone birthday for one of Harold's siblings. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, the aroma of grilled food wafting through the air, and the sounds of children playing in the distance. Family members mingled, sharing stories and reminiscing about old times, creating an air of nostalgia that enveloped the gathering. Clara arrived early, eager to help with the preparations. She wore a bright sundress that accentuated her figure, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within her. As she moved about the yard, arranging tables and setting out decorations, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach. The presence of Trey Garrison loomed large in her mind, and she was acutely aware of the secret she was harboring. Trey had been invited to the reunion as a family friend, a decision that Clara had made with a mix of excitement and dread. She knew that having him there would complicate things, but she also craved the thrill of being near him, even if it meant risking everything. As the guests began to arrive, Clara's heart raced at the thought of seeing Trey. When he finally walked through the gate, his easy smile and confident demeanor drew her in like a moth to a flame. They exchanged pleasantries, their interactions laced with an undercurrent of tension that only they could feel. Clara's laughter came easily as they reminisced about shared experiences, but beneath the surface, she was acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. Every glance, every touch, felt charged with meaning, and she found herself lost in the moment, momentarily forgetting the consequences of their actions. Harold, meanwhile, was busy greeting family members and ensuring that everyone felt welcome. He was in his element, the charismatic sheriff who had always been the life of the party. Yet, as he moved through the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed the way Clara's laughter seemed a little too bright, a little too forced, and how her eyes sparkled with a light that he hadn't seen in a long time. It was a stark contrast to the emotional distance that had developed between them in recent months. Harold's instincts kicked in, and he felt a growing sense of unease as he observed the interactions between Clara and Trey. The tension in the air was palpable, and as the afternoon wore on, Harold's suspicions deepened. He caught glimpses of Clara and Trey stealing away for private conversations, their laughter echoing in the distance. Each time he saw them together, a knot tightened in his stomach. He tried to brush it off, convincing himself that he was being paranoid, but the feeling persisted. Harold had always prided himself on being a good judge of character, and something about Trey's presence felt off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he sensed an underlying tension that made him uneasy. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the gathering, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter and chatter began to fade, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Harold found himself drawn to Clara, wanting to reconnect with her amidst the chaos of family dynamics. He approached her, hoping to share a moment of intimacy, but as he did, he noticed Trey lingering nearby, watching them with an intensity that sent a chill down Harold's spine. The sight of them together ignited a fire of jealousy within him, and he felt a surge of protectiveness over Clara, even as he struggled to understand the source of his discomfort. The pivotal moment came when the family gathered for a group photo. As everyone positioned themselves, Harold instinctively reached for Clara, pulling her close to him. In that moment, he felt a flicker of hope that they could recapture the connection they once shared. But as he looked over at Trey, who stood just a few feet away, a sense of foreboding washed over him. The way Trey looked at Clara, with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the facade of the gathering, sent a jolt of realization through Harold. He could no longer ignore the growing suspicions that had been gnawing at him throughout the day. As the camera clicked and the moment was captured, Harold's heart raced. He felt a sense of impending doom, as if the photograph would forever immortalize the tension that had been building throughout the event. The smiles plastered on their faces felt hollow, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to unravel. The significance of this gathering weighed heavily on him, as he realized that it was not just a celebration but a turning point in their lives. The reunion had become a stage for the confrontation that was looming on the horizon, and the emotional stakes had never been higher. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. Harold found himself drawn into conversations with family members, but his mind was elsewhere, fixated on Clara and Trey. He watched as they exchanged glances, their chemistry undeniable. Each laugh they shared felt like a dagger to Harold's heart, and he struggled to maintain his composure. The tension reached a boiling point when Clara and Trey stepped away from the group, seemingly lost in their own world. Harold's instincts kicked in, and he felt a surge of anger and betrayal rising within him. Unable to contain himself any longer, Harold excused himself from the conversation and followed them, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, he overheard snippets of their conversation, the intimacy of their words cutting through him like a knife. Clara's laughter rang out, and Harold felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had to confront them, to demand answers, but the fear of what he might discover held him back. The significance of this moment loomed large, as he realized that the reunion had become a catalyst for the truth to emerge. Finally, unable to bear the weight of the situation any longer, Harold stepped into their line of sight. The look of surprise on Clara's face was quickly replaced by a mixture of guilt and fear. Trey's expression shifted to one of defiance, and the tension in the air crackled like electricity. The atmosphere that had once been filled with laughter and joy was now thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Harold's heart raced as he prepared to confront the truth, knowing that this moment would change everything. "Clara," he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "we need to talk." The words hung in the air, heavy with significance, as the reality of their situation began to sink in. The reunion that had once been a celebration had transformed into a battleground, where secrets would be laid bare, and the consequences of their actions would finally come to light. The pivotal family gathering had set the stage for a confrontation that would unravel the lives of everyone involved, leaving a lasting impact on the Grayson family and the community of Ellisville. As Harold stood before Clara and Trey, the weight of the moment pressed down on him like a heavy shroud. His heart raced, a tumult of emotions swirling within him: anger, betrayal, confusion, and a deep, gnawing sadness. The laughter and joy of the family reunion faded into the background, replaced by the deafening silence that enveloped them. Harold's mind raced as he struggled to process the reality of the situation. The woman he loved, the woman he had built a life with, had betrayed him in the most profound way imaginable. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. "Is this true? Are you really having an affair with him?" The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and heartbreak. Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words. Harold could see the conflict in her expression: guilt, fear, and a flicker of defiance. The tension between them was palpable, a chasm that had opened up in an instant, threatening to swallow them whole. Trey, sensing the gravity of the situation, took a step back, his presence suddenly feeling intrusive. "I think it's best if he started, but Harold cut him off with a sharp glare. "No, you stay right there," he snapped, his anger boiling over. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in his gut, and he couldn't bear the thought of Trey slipping away unscathed. This was not just a confrontation with Clara, it was a reckoning with the man who had invaded their lives. Clara took a deep breath, her composure wavering. "Harold, please, let's talk about this," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think." But Harold could see the cracks in her facade, the way her hands fidgeted and her eyes darted away from his gaze. The truth was there, unspoken but undeniable, and he felt a surge of rage at the thought of her trying to downplay the gravity of her actions. "Not what I think," he echoed incredulously. "You've been lying to me, Clara. For how long? How long have you been seeing him behind my back?" The accusation hung in the air, and Clara flinched as if struck. Harold's heart ached at the sight of her distress, but the pain of betrayal overshadowed any sympathy he felt. The emotional turmoil within him was a tempest, and he struggled to keep it at bay. Clara's voice broke as she responded. "It started as a friendship, Harold. I was lonely. You were always working, and I felt like I was losing you." Her words were a desperate attempt to justify her actions, but they only fueled Harold's anger. He had dedicated himself to his job, yes, but he had done so for their family, for their future. The thought that Clara had interpreted his dedication as neglect felt like a betrayal of its own. "Lonely?" Harold spat, his voice rising. "You think that gives you the right to betray me, to throw away everything we've built together? Our family, our life?" The hurt in his voice was palpable, and he could feel the tears welling in his eyes, threatening to spill over. He fought against them, unwilling to show weakness in front of Clara and Trey. The emotional state he found himself in was a volatile mix of anger and heartbreak, and he felt as though he was teetering on the edge of an abyss. Clara's expression shifted, and for a moment, Harold saw a flicker of remorse. "I never wanted to hurt you, Harold. I thought I could handle it. I thought it was just a phase," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But her words felt hollow, and Harold could sense the insincerity behind them. The truth was that she had made a choice that had shattered their marriage and left him reeling. "Just a phase?" he repeated, incredulous. "You think this is something you can just brush off? You've been lying to me, Clara. You've been lying to our children. What do you think this is going to do to them?" The thought of their children, innocent and unaware of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface, sent a fresh wave of anguish through him. He had always wanted to protect them, to shield them from pain, and now he felt as though he had failed them in the most profound way. Trey, who had been standing silently, finally spoke up. "Harold, I didn't mean for this to happen. Clara and I." But Harold cut him off again, his anger boiling over. "You don't get to speak. You're the one who took advantage of my wife's vulnerability. You're the one who crossed a line that should never have been crossed." The fury in Harold's voice was palpable, and he could feel the heat radiating off him as he confronted the man who had disrupted his life. Clara stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Harold, please. This isn't just about us anymore. We need to think about the kids. We need to figure this out together." But her words fell on deaf ears. Harold felt as though he was drowning in a sea of betrayal, and the thought of working together felt impossible. The foundation of their marriage had crumbled, and he couldn't see a way back. "Together?" he scoffed, bitterness lacing his words. "How can we be together when you've shattered my trust, when you've chosen to be with him instead of me?" The pain in his voice was raw, and he could feel the tears threatening to spill over. He fought against them, unwilling to show vulnerability in front of Clara and Trey. The emotional turmoil within him was a tempest, and he struggled to keep it at bay. The tension in the air was thick, and the atmosphere felt charged with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Clara's face was a mixture of regret and defiance, and Harold could see the conflict within her. She wanted to explain, to justify her actions, but the truth was that there was no justification for what she had done. The betrayal was too deep, and the damage too great. As the confrontation escalated, Harold felt a sense of desperation creeping in. He had always believed in the sanctity of marriage, in the vows they had taken together. The thought of losing Clara, of losing the life they had built, was unbearable. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that the woman he had once known was slipping away, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. "Do you even love him?" Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy with significance. Clara hesitated, and in that moment, Harold felt his heart shatter. The silence spoke volumes, and he could see the truth reflected in her eyes. The love they had once shared was now tainted by betrayal, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "I don't know," Clara finally admitted, her voice trembling. "I was lost, Harold. I thought I could find myself again, but I only ended up hurting you." The admission felt like a dagger, and Harold's heart ached at the vulnerability in her words. But the pain of her betrayal overshadowed any sympathy he felt. The emotional state he found himself in was a volatile mix of anger and heartbreak, and he felt as though he was teetering on the edge of an abyss. The confrontation reached a boiling point, and Harold could feel the walls closing in around him. The weight of the situation was suffocating, and he knew that something had to give. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't pretend that everything is okay when it's not. You've broken my trust, Clara, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you." The words felt like a finality, a closing of a chapter that had once been filled with love and hope. Clara's face crumpled, and for the first time, Harold saw the depth of her regret. "Harold, please," she begged, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make it work." But her words felt empty, and Harold knew that the damage had been done. The emotional turmoil that had been brewing beneath the surface had finally erupted, and there was no going back. As the confrontation reached its climax, Harold felt a sense of clarity wash over him. The love they had once shared was now overshadowed by betrayal, and he knew that the road ahead would be fraught with pain and heartache. The significance of this moment weighed heavily on him, as he realized that their marriage had been irrevocably changed. The confrontation had set the stage for a tragic outcome, one that would leave scars on their hearts and forever alter the course of their lives. In that moment, as the tears flowed and the pain of betrayal hung in the air, Harold understood that the path forward would not be easy. The confrontation had laid bare the truth of their situation, and the emotional fallout would reverberate through their lives for years to come. The tragedy of their love story was unfolding before them, and as they stood on the precipice of heartbreak, Harold knew that the choices they made in the coming days would shape their futures in ways they could not yet comprehend. The sun had barely risen over Ellisville when the news broke that Sheriff Harold Grayson had been found dead. The small town, known for its tight-knit community and peaceful streets, was suddenly engulfed in shock and disbelief. The scene of the crime was the sheriff's own home, a place that had once been a sanctuary for his family, now transformed into a site of tragedy. The front yard, usually filled with laughter and the sounds of children playing, was cordoned off with yellow police tape, a stark reminder of the grim reality that had unfolded within its walls. As the news spread, residents gathered outside the perimeter, their faces etched with concern and confusion. Whispers filled the air, a cacophony of speculation and fear. How could this happen? What happened to Harold? He was such a good man. The questions hung heavy in the air, mingling with the morning mist that clung to the ground. The community, once united in admiration for their sheriff, now found themselves grappling with the harsh reality of loss and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Inside the house, the atmosphere was somber. Harold's body lay in the living room, a stark contrast to the warmth and love that had once filled the space. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight as if to shield the world from the tragedy that had unfolded. Harold's lifeless form was surrounded by the remnants of a life cut short. Family photos on the walls, a half-finished cup of coffee on the table, and the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. It was a scene that would haunt the community for years to come, a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface. Detective Samuel Drury arrived on the scene shortly after the call came in. A seasoned investigator with years of experience under his belt, Drury was known for his methodical approach and keen intuition. He stepped out of his car, taking a moment to survey the scene before entering the house. The sight of the gathered crowd, their faces a mixture of grief and curiosity, only deepened his resolve to uncover the truth behind Harold's death. He understood the weight of the investigation that lay ahead. The sheriff was not just a public servant, but a beloved figure in the community, and the stakes were high. As he entered the house, Drury was struck by the stark contrast between the warmth of the home and the cold reality of the situation. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the room for any clues that might shed light on what had transpired. The initial assessment revealed no signs of forced entry, which raised questions about whether Harold had known his assailant. Drury's mind raced with possibilities, and he knew that every detail mattered. He began to piece together the timeline of events leading up to the tragedy, determined to find answers for the grieving community. The initial theories surrounding Harold's death began to take shape as Drury interviewed witnesses and gathered evidence. Some speculated that it could have been a robbery gone wrong, while others whispered about the possibility of a personal vendetta. The sheriff had made enemies during his time in office, and the thought that someone might have wanted him dead sent chills through the community. Drury took note of the various theories, understanding that each one held a kernel of truth that could lead him closer to the answers he sought. As he delved deeper into the investigation, Drury began to uncover the complexities of Harold's life. he learned about the pressures Harold faced as sheriff, the challenges of maintaining law and order in a town that was experiencing rising crime rates. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that Harold's death was not just a random act of violence, but a culmination of the tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface. The community's admiration for Harold was now tinged with suspicion, and Drury knew that he had to tread carefully as he navigated the delicate web of relationships that surrounded the sheriff. The reactions of the community were varied, ranging from disbelief to anger. Some residents rallied together, holding vigils in Harold's honor, while others expressed their frustration at the police for not being able to prevent such a tragedy. The sense of safety that had once enveloped Ellisville was shattered, and the fear of the unknown loomed large. Drury understood that the emotional state of the community would play a significant role in the investigation. He made it a priority to engage with the residents, reassuring them that he would do everything in his power to find justice for Harold. As the investigation progressed, Drury began to focus on the relationships in Harold's life. He spoke with Clara, Harold's wife, who was understandably distraught. Her grief was palpable, and Drury approached the interview with sensitivity, knowing that she was not only mourning the loss of her husband, but also grappling with the fallout from their troubled marriage. Clara's responses were filled with emotion, and Drury noted that the tension in her voice as she spoke about Harold's dedication to his work and the strain it had placed on their relationship. Drury also reached out to Harold's colleagues in law enforcement, hoping to gain insight into any potential threats or conflicts that may have contributed to his death. The conversations revealed a complex picture of a man who was deeply committed to his job, but also burdened by the weight of responsibility. As Drury pieced together the fragments of Harold's life, he began to see the shadows that had loomed over the sheriff, the pressures that had built up over time, and the potential motives that could have driven someone to commit such a heinous act. The investigation took a turn when Drury received a tip from an anonymous source, suggesting that Harold had been involved in a controversial case that had stirred up tensions within the community. The case involved a local drug ring that had been operating under the radar, and Harold's efforts to crack down on their activities had made him a target. Drury felt a surge of determination as he followed this lead, understanding that it could be the key to unraveling the mystery surrounding Harold's death. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation continued to unfold, revealing layers of complexity that only deepened the tragedy of Harold's death. The community remained on edge, grappling with their grief while searching for answers. Drury knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was resolute in his commitment to uncovering the truth. The stakes were high, and the memory of Sheriff Harold Grayson loomed large in the hearts of the people of Ellisville. The scene of the crime, once a place of warmth and love, had become a haunting reminder of the fragility of life. The initial reactions of the community, filled with shock and disbelief, echoed in the air as they struggled to come to terms with the loss of their beloved sheriff. Detective Samuel Drury's approach to the investigation was methodical and thorough, as he navigated the complexities of Harold's life and the relationships that surrounded him. The initial theories surrounding Harold's death began to take shape, revealing a web of intrigue and tension that would ultimately lead to the tragic outcome that followed. As the investigation progressed, Drury remained steadfast in his pursuit of justice for Harold. He understood that the truth was often buried beneath layers of deception and fear, and he was determined to peel back those layers, no matter how painful the process might be. The community of Ellisville was counting on him, and he would not rest until he uncovered the truth behind the tragic death of Sheriff Harold Grayson. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Drury was prepared to face them head-on, driven by the memory of a man who had dedicated his life to serving and protecting his community. As the investigation into Sheriff Harold Grayson's death progressed, the focus began to shift toward the complex relationship between Clara and Trey Garrison. Detective Samuel Drury, determined to uncover the truth, meticulously examined the evidence that pointed to Clara's affair and its implications for the case. The more he delved into their lives, the clearer it became that the affair was not just a personal betrayal, but a potential motive for murder. The first piece of evidence that raised suspicions about Clara's involvement was the discovery of text messages on Harold's phone. After obtaining a warrant, the detectives accessed Harold's messages, revealing a series of heated exchanges between him and Clara in the days leading up to his death. The messages were filled with tension, reflecting the strain in their marriage. Clara expressed feelings of loneliness and frustration, while Harold's responses were often defensive and accusatory. The emotional weight of their conversations painted a picture of a couple on the brink of collapse, and Drury couldn't help but wonder if the turmoil had escalated to a breaking point. In addition to the text messages, the detectives uncovered evidence of Clara's communications with Trey. Phone records indicated that Clara had been in frequent contact with him, particularly during the weeks leading up to Harold's death. The timing of their conversations raised red flags for the investigators. It was clear that Clara had been confiding in Trey during a tumultuous period in her marriage, and the detectives began to piece together a timeline of events that suggested a deeper connection between the two. Drury and his team worked diligently to establish the timeline surrounding Harold's death. They interviewed neighbors, family members, and friends, gathering information about Clara and Trey's whereabouts on the night of the murder. Witnesses reported seeing Clara and Trey together at a local bar just days before Harold's body was discovered. Their interactions were described as flirtatious, and several patrons noted the chemistry between them. This information further fueled the detectives' suspicions, as it suggested that their relationship had crossed a line into something more than friendship. As the detectives continued to investigate, they discovered that Clara had been unusually evasive about her whereabouts on the night of Harold's death. When questioned, she claimed to have been at home, but her alibi was shaky at best. The detectives found inconsistencies in her story, and as they dug deeper, they uncovered surveillance footage from a nearby gas station that showed Clara's car leaving the area around the time of Harold's murder. The footage was a crucial piece of evidence, as it contradicted her claims and raised further questions about her involvement. The implications of Clara's affair were profound, not only for the investigation but also for the community of Ellisville. As the detectives began to connect the dots, the narrative of a tragic love story took on a darker tone. The idea that Clara could have been involved in Harold's death sent shockwaves through the town, which had once viewed her as a devoted wife and mother. The community's perception of Clara began to shift, and whispers of betrayal and deceit filled the air. As secrets began to surface, the reaction from the community was one of disbelief and outrage. Many residents had known Clara for years, and the thought that she could be involved in such a heinous act was unfathomable. The local coffee shop, once a gathering place for friends and neighbors, became a hotbed of gossip and speculation. Conversations that had once revolved around the weather or local events now centered on the scandal that had rocked their town. How could she do this? What was she thinking? The questions echoed through the streets, and the sense of betrayal was palpable. The emotional fallout from the investigation extended beyond Clara and Harold's immediate family. Friends and neighbors who had once supported Clara now found themselves grappling with feelings of anger and confusion. Many felt betrayed by the woman they had trusted, and the sense of community that had once defined Ellisville began to fray at the edges. The detectives were acutely aware of the impact their findings were having on the town, and they worked diligently to maintain transparency while also protecting the integrity of the investigation. As the detectives pieced together the timeline of events, they uncovered a series of interactions between Clara and Trey that painted a troubling picture. Clara had confided in Trey about her struggles in her marriage, expressing feelings of isolation and frustration. Trey, in turn, had offered her a sympathetic ear, and their emotional connection had deepened over time. The detectives discovered that Clara had been spending more time with Trey in the weeks leading up to Harold's death, often under the guise of running errands or attending social events. The evidence suggested that their relationship had evolved into something more intimate, and the detectives began to wonder if Clara's feelings for Trey had played a role in the tragic events that unfolded. The detectives also explored the possibility that Clara and Trey had conspired together, raising the specter of premeditated murder. While there was no direct evidence linking Trey to Harold's death, the detectives were keenly aware of the implications of their relationship. The idea that Clara could have been motivated by a desire to escape her marriage and start anew with Trey was a chilling thought, and it fueled the investigation as they sought to uncover the truth. As the investigation progressed, the detectives faced the challenge of navigating the emotional landscape of the community. The revelations about Clara's affair and the implications of her involvement in Harold's death had created a rift among residents. Friends were divided, with some standing by Clara, while others condemned her actions. The tension in the town was palpable, and the detectives knew that they had to tread carefully as they continued their work. Drury made it a priority to engage with the community, holding meetings to address concerns and provide updates on the investigation. He understood that transparency was crucial in maintaining trust, and he wanted the residents to feel heard. As he spoke to the gathered crowd, he could see the mixture of emotions on their faces: grief, anger, confusion. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, and Drury knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. The detectives' findings regarding Clara and Trey's involvement in Harold's death had far-reaching implications for the community. As secrets began to surface, the narrative of a tragic love story transformed into a tale of betrayal and heartbreak. The investigation had uncovered layers of complexity that revealed the fragility of relationships and the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface. The emotional fallout from the revelations would leave a lasting impact on the town of Ellisville, forever altering the lives of those involved. As the investigation continued, the detectives remained committed to uncovering the truth. They understood that the answers they sought would not only bring justice for Harold, but also provide closure for a community grappling with loss and betrayal. The journey ahead would be challenging, but Drury was resolute in his determination to piece together the puzzle and reveal the truth behind the tragic events that had unfolded in their once peaceful town. The investigation into Clara and Trey's involvement was just the beginning, and the implications of their actions would resonate throughout Ellisville for years to come. The trial of Trey Garrison was a highly publicized event that captivated the small town of Ellisville and drew attention from media outlets across the state. The courtroom was packed with residents eager to witness the proceedings, their emotions running high as they sought answers to the tragic death of Sheriff Harold Grayson. The atmosphere was charged with tension, a palpable mix of grief, anger, and curiosity as the prosecution laid out its case against Trey, while the defense prepared to counter with its arguments. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of circumstantial evidence that painted a damning picture of Trey's involvement in Harold's death. Lead prosecutor Angela Ramirez presented a compelling narrative that suggested a motive rooted in jealousy and betrayal. She argued that Trey had been having an affair with Clara, which had escalated to a point where he felt threatened by Harold's presence in their lives. The prosecution highlighted the timeline of events leading up to Harold's murder, emphasizing the frequent communications between Clara and Trey, as well as their encounters in the days before the tragedy. Witnesses testified about the nature of Clara and Trey's relationship, describing it as intimate and emotionally charged. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had become consumed by his feelings for Clara, suggesting that he may have acted out of desperation when faced with the reality of her marriage to Harold. The prosecution also pointed to the surveillance footage that showed Clara's car leaving the area around the time of Harold's death, implying that she had conspired with Trey to facilitate the murder. In response, the defense team, led by the seasoned attorney Mark Thompson, sought to dismantle the prosecution's narrative. Thompson argued that the evidence presented was circumstantial at best, and that there was no direct proof linking Trey to Harold's murder. He emphasized that the prosecution had failed to establish a clear motive, suggesting that the relationship between Clara and Trey was not one of conspiracy, but rather a misguided attempt at emotional support during a difficult time. Thompson painted Trey as a victim of circumstance, a man caught in a web of lies and deceit that he had not created. The defense also called several character witnesses who testified to Trey's good nature and his commitment to the community. They argued that he had no reason to harm Harold, a man he respected and admired. Thompson's strategy was to humanize Trey, to show the jury that he was not the monster the prosecution had portrayed him to be. He urged the jury to consider the lack of physical evidence linking Trey to the crime, emphasizing that the prosecution's case relied heavily on speculation and conjecture. As the trial progressed, the tension in the courtroom escalated. Clara's presence was a constant reminder of the emotional turmoil that had led to this moment. She sat in the gallery, her face a mask of anguish as she listened to the details of her affair with Trey being laid bare for all to see. The implications of the trial weighed heavily on her, and she felt the eyes of the community upon her, judging her for her choices. The emotional fallout from the affair and the subsequent murder had left her feeling isolated and vulnerable, and the trial only intensified her feelings of guilt and shame. The jury deliberated for several days, and the anticipation in the courtroom was palpable. As the verdict was announced, a hush fell over the crowd. The foreman stood, his voice steady as he declared, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Trey Garrison, not guilty of the charges against him." The words hung in the air, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over the courtroom. The prosecution's case had not been strong enough to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt, and the community was left grappling with the implications of the verdict. The reaction from the community was swift and divided. Some residents expressed relief at the verdict, believing that justice had been served and that Trey was innocent of the crime. Others were outraged, feeling that the system had failed them and that the true culprit had escaped accountability. The emotional fallout from the trial reverberated throughout Ellisville, as friends and neighbors found themselves at odds over the outcome. The sense of safety that had once defined the town was shattered, and the lingering questions about Harold's death remained unanswered. For Clara, the trial had profound implications for her life. The verdict may have cleared Trey of criminal charges, but it did little to absolve her of the guilt she felt for her role in the events that had transpired. The affair had not only cost her the love of her husband, but had also left her with a tarnished reputation in the community. As the whispers and gossip continued to circulate, Clara found herself increasingly isolated. Friends who had once supported her now distanced themselves, unable to reconcile the woman they had known with the person who had been embroiled in such a scandal. The emotional toll of the trial weighed heavily on Clara, and she struggled to come to terms with the consequences of her actions. The guilt of having betrayed Harold, coupled with the knowledge that her choices had contributed to the tragic events that unfolded, left her feeling lost and alone. She sought solace in therapy, hoping to find a way to navigate the complex emotions that had arisen from the affair and the subsequent fallout. The journey toward healing was fraught with challenges, and Clara often found herself grappling with feelings of shame and regret. As the dust settled from the trial, Clara faced the reality of her situation. The community that had once embraced her now viewed her through a lens of suspicion and judgment. She felt the weight of their disapproval, and the emotional scars from the affair and the trial ran deep. Clara knew that rebuilding her life would take time, and she was determined to confront the consequences of her actions head-on. In the months that followed, Clara began to focus on her children, seeking to create a stable environment for them amidst the chaos. She poured her energy into being a present and loving mother, hoping to shield them from the fallout of her choices. The road to redemption was long, but Clara was committed to making amends and finding a way to move forward. She understood that the journey would not be easy, but she was determined to reclaim her life and rebuild the trust that had been shattered.